They say a man's worth is measured by what he builds. 30 years under open skies and steel skeletons taught me otherwise. A man's worth is measured by what he refuses to cut corners on, even when no one's looking. That's a lesson carved into my bones by sweat and concrete, a lesson I lived by every damn day. And yet, as I stood on the third floor of the Riverview commercial complex, staring at a set of gleaming bolts that didn't quite sit right in their sockets, I realized I was surrounded by men who'd never learned it. I crouched down, ran a calloused thumb over the head of one of the bolts. Too smooth. Too light. I knew this wasn't the grade specified in the structural plans. Not by a long shot. Brandon Ellis appeared behind me like a bad habit you can't shake. Crisp shirt, no dirt under his nails, and that ever-present tablet glued to his palm like it held the secrets of the universe. "You're holding up the framing crew, Carter," he said flatly, not even looking at me, eyes locked on the glass rectangle in his hands. I stood, straightening my back despite the ache in my knees. "These bolts aren't what we ordered. They're grade 2 at best. The plans call for grade 5. You want to explain that before we keep stacking steel on top of them?" Brandon barely flinched. "Supplier confirmed they meet acceptable standards. That's all that matters. We're on a tight schedule, Ethan. You know that." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Acceptable doesn't hold up a building in a Montana windstorm. Or a goddamn earthquake. Grade 2 shears like butter under lateral stress." He finally looked up, his eyes as cold as the snowcaps on the Beartooth Mountains. "You're thinking like a man stuck in the past. The engineering team signed off, and we're moving forward. Either get on board or get out of the way." That's when I knew. I wasn't just up against bad decisions, I was up against a man who saw safety as a line item expense, something to trim when margins got tight. I didn't yell. That's what men like him expected from bulldogs like me. A red-faced outburst. A thrown hard hat. Instead, I pulled out my phone, snapped a clear photo of the bolts, their cheap heads practically grinning back at me. Documentation, that's how you survive men like Brandon Ellis. "You don't get to say I didn't warn you," I muttered, sliding the phone back into my pocket. He smirked like he'd already won. "You're slowing us down, Ethan. Don't be the old guy who couldn't keep up." I watched him stride away across the skeletal floor, barking orders at men too young to know better and too underpaid to care. Above us, the sky stretched wide and cloudless. Beautiful day for building something that might one day collapse under its own lies. And just like that, the fracture lines weren't just in the steel, they'd formed between me and everything I'd ever stood for. It didn't take long after that confrontation. 3 days, to be exact. On the morning of the third day, Brandon called me into the site trailer. He sat behind that oversized desk like a king on a plywood throne, fingers tapping against the tablet that never left his side. "This isn't working, Ethan," he said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "Termination notice." My name printed at the top as neatly as a death certificate. "We need people who prioritize progress," he continued, eyes cool and detached. "People who understand the realities of modern construction timelines." I stared at the paper, then at him. 30 years of building things the right way, tossed aside in a single sentence. "Progress?" I said quietly. "You mean shortcuts? Cost savings at the expense of safety? Is that what they teach you in those glossy boardrooms back in Seattle?" Brandon leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I think you know the door, Mr. Carter." And just like that, I was out. I sat in my truck for hours that afternoon, parked at the far edge of the lot where no one would see me brake. The cardboard box with my name scrawled in black marker sat on the passenger seat like a silent witness. A few personal tools, my old thermos, a faded photograph of Grace and me on the shores of Flathead Lake. Everything else, gone. I turned the keys in my hands, stared through the windshield at the skeletal frame of Riverview rising against the Montana sky. Was it worth it? That question sat heavier on my chest than any steel beam I'd ever hoisted. I was 51 years old. No one hires a man like me in this industry anymore, not when there's a younger, cheaper version willing to say yes to whatever makes the profit margin smile. I thought about Grace working late at the hospital, pulling double shifts to help pay for the roof I'd promised to fix this summer. Promises that now felt as hollow as the empty elevator shafts of that damn building. My knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. I'd stood by my principles. But principles didn't put food on the table or a roof over your head. That night, Grace found me sitting at the kitchen table, the unopened box still on the counter. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me in a way no paycheck ever could. "You're not defined by a company logo, Ethan," she said softly. "Your name might not be carved into the concrete outside that building, but it's in every beam you insisted was placed right. In every bolt that won't shear under pressure because you refuse to look the other way." Her words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown across rough waters. "You've built more than structures," she whispered. "You've built trust." And somehow, in that moment, I believed her. Later that night, I finally opened the box. Amid the battered thermos and old site maps, something slipped free, a sealed folder I didn't remember packing. No label. Just a plain manila folder, edges worn like it had been handled too many times. Inside was a set of architectural plans stamped faintly at the bottom corner, Project Phoenix. I flipped through the sheets, my eyes catching familiar annotations. This wasn't some mock-up or discarded proposal. It was the original design for Riverview, complete with structural reinforcements, higher-grade materials, and additional safety redundancies. But none of this had ever made it into the construction phase. A second stamp caught my eye, half-faded but unmistakable. City of Billings, preliminary approval. My pulse quickened. Someone had approved this design, and then buried it. Why? And more importantly, how the hell did this end up in my box? I leaned back, the kitchen chair creaking under my weight, staring at the plans spread across the table. Someone had wanted me to find this. Someone inside. A ghost in the machine who still believed in doing things right. But who? And what were they risking to get this into my hands? For the first time in days, my mind wasn't focused on what I'd lost, but on what I'd just uncovered. And I had a sinking feeling that Riverview's foundation wasn't the only thing cracking under pressure. The call came the next morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. Unknown number. But I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ethan Carter," I said, voice flat as poured concrete. Brandon Ellis didn't waste time on pleasantries. His voice came through sharp, cold, like steel under tension. "You think you're clever, Carter? Stirring up trouble on your way out?" I glanced at the architectural plan still spread across my kitchen table. "I don't need to stir anything, Brandon. The rot's already there. I just pulled back the drywall." "You're playing a dangerous game," he hissed. "You've got a reputation now, troublemaker, non-compliant, stuck in the past. Word travels fast. You think any site manager's going to hire a man who tanks projects and makes noise?" I could almost see his smug smile through the phone line. "Enjoy your early retirement, old man," he added before the line went dead. I set the phone down gently, my hand steadier than I expected. Part of me had known this was coming. Another part wanted to smash the phone through the window. I spent the next 2 days making calls. Old friends. Former colleagues. Anyone who owed me a favor, or at least remembered the kind of work I stood for. Every call ended the same way. "Sorry, Ethan. We're fully staffed." Or worse, silence. The last one to pick up was Tom Rayner at Elkridge Builders, a man I'd helped land his first foreman job 15 years ago. "I'd love to help, Ethan, really," he said, his voice low, like he didn't want anyone overhearing. "But there's been talk. You know how this industry works. Nobody wants a guy who draws attention to things best left alone. I thanked him anyway, hung up, and stared at the wall until the sun disappeared behind the mountains. This wasn't just about a job. This was about erasure. Brandon and his ilk weren't just cutting me loose, they were cutting me out of the industry altogether. It was well past midnight when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was Hank Dawson. "Meet me at Jackson's Diner," he said. "Bring the plans." The diner sat on the edge of town, the kind of place that still smelled like fried bacon no matter the hour. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth, the Project Phoenix folder tucked under my arm. Hank arrived 5 minutes later, wearing his old denim jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Right behind him came Megan Lawson, her expression unreadable under the flickering fluorescent lights. Without a word, Hank pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and set it on the table between us. "That's everything," he said. "Procurement records, payment logs, and a ledger Megan found, names, numbers, payoff schedules. Hell, even the brand of scotch they used to grease the city inspector." I stared at the tiny device like it was a live explosive. "Where did this come from?" I asked, my voice low. Megan's eyes finally met mine. Cool, steady, but there was something brittle beneath the surface, like a woman holding herself together by sheer will. "I've been sitting on it for months," she admitted. "Didn't know who I could trust. After you got canned, well, I figured you were the only one left who'd do something about it." I looked to Hank, confusion written all over my face. He exhaled heavily, running a weathered hand through his thinning hair. "My son, Ryan," he muttered. "He's a fresh-out-of-college architect. Just signed a deal to lease 3 floors of Riverview for his firm. They're supposed to move in next spring." He swallowed hard, his eyes glassy. "I'm not about to let my boys set foot in that death trap, Ethan. Not if I can help it." That settled something in my chest. All this time, I'd been wondering if I was the last man left who cared. But here they were, quiet allies, hidden beneath the surface, risking everything to do what was right. As we left the diner, the night air bit sharp against my face. Megan paused beside me before heading to her car. "You didn't find that folder by accident, Ethan," she said quietly. "Just, be careful. You've already made some powerful enemies." I turned the flash drive over in my palm as they disappeared into the dark, the weight of it impossibly heavy for something so small. Back home, under the hum of the kitchen light, I plugged the drive into my old laptop. Folder after folder opened before me. Invoices showing cheaper materials substituted for structural steel. Emails approving undocumented design changes. And a spreadsheet. Names. Dates. Payouts. It wasn't just Brandon Ellis. It went higher. City officials. Corporate execs. People who signed their names to promises they had no intention of keeping. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all crashing down. I wasn't fighting a bad project anymore. I was standing against an entire system built on lies. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I had enough fight left to take it down. The news broke before sunrise. A worker, Luis Ortega, 29 years old, father of 2, fell from the 5th floor scaffolding at Riverview. Faulty supports. I knew it before the news anchors could even stammer through their reports. Knew it before the shaky phone footage flooded social media, showing that twisted mass of mangled steel and shattered planks dangling like a noose against the pale morning sky. By noon, the site was crawling with cameras and reporters, their vans choking the street like vultures circling a fresh kill. I stood outside the yellow police tape that wrapped around the entrance, gripping the Project Phoenix folder under my arm like it was a weapon. Luis wasn't dead, God knows, that was the only blessing, but his spine was broken. He wouldn't walk again. And for what? A few thousand saved on materials. Another week shaved off the schedule. My jaw clenched as Brandon Ellis strutted through the chaos, giving clipped statements to the media, playing the part of the concerned executive like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "This is an isolated incident," he said, voice slick as oil. "We're cooperating fully with authorities. Safety has always been our top priority." I felt bile rise in my throat. That afternoon, the call came from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Ethan Carter," I answered, already on edge. The voice on the other end was older, rough but steady. "This is Charles Morgan," he said. "We need to talk." It took me a second to place the name. Morgan, founder of Driftline. Rick Morgan's father. "Why me?" I asked cautiously. "Because my son's about to burn down everything I built," he growled. "And I'm not about to let the Morgan name be etched into a damn tombstone." Charles invited me to his home, perched on the quiet northern edge of Flathead Lake. Not the mansion I expected, a modest, weathered cabin overlooking the water, the kind of place a man retreats to when he's had enough of the world's noise. He greeted me at the door, his handshake firm despite the tremor in his age-worn fingers. We sat out on the deck, the lake stretching out before us, still and cold under the gray sky. "I always believed," he began, eyes fixed on the horizon, "that if you built something solid enough, it would outlast you. That's the damn lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? Build it fast, build it cheap, and no one cares what's hidden behind the drywall." I laid the Project Phoenix folder on the table between us. "This is what your company was supposed to build," I said. "Your son buried it." He let out a hollow laugh, one that sounded more like a man giving up air he'd held onto for too long. "Rick always cared more about growth than about legacy," Charles admitted. "He took the keys the day I retired and drove straight off a cliff. But this," he jabbed a finger at the folder, "this is criminal." He turned toward me, his gaze clear despite the years etched into his face. "I'm too old to clean up his mess, Ethan. But you've still got some fight left." I shook my head. "They've already blackballed me. I'm one step from being a ghost in this industry." Charles smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you're dangerous to them. You've got nothing left to lose." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "We expose this publicly. No more backroom reports. No more quiet complaints that get lost in a file cabinet. We hold a press conference. I'll stand beside you. I'll put my name on it." For a moment, I just stared at him. This wasn't the play I expected. "And what happens after that?" I asked. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then we let the damn thing burn." By the time I left his cabin, the sky had darkened, the lake reflecting nothing but storm clouds. As I pulled onto the main road, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan Lawson. "OSHA just walked onto the site. Surprise inspection. Brandon's losing it." I smiled grimly. The dominoes had started to fall. Tomorrow, Charles and I would stand in front of the press, side by side. And for once, the truth wouldn't stay buried. The room was packed beyond capacity. Every news outlet in Billings had shown up, their cameras perched on tripods like vultures waiting for the first signs of a corpse. The air felt heavier than the steel beams at Riverview, thick with the scent of scandal and anticipation. I stood at the edge of the stage, the Project Phoenix folder tucked neatly under my arm, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Beside me, Charles Morgan adjusted the microphone. His back, once straight as a steel column, sagged just slightly under the weight of what he was about to do. But his voice, when it came, cut through the noise like a wrecking ball through glass. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his eyes scanning the sea of reporters. "I'm Charles Morgan, founder of Driftline Construction. And I stand before you today to say something no man ever wants to say about his life's work." He paused, his gaze steady. "Better no legacy at all than one built on broken promises and broken lives." A hush fell over the room. Cameras clicked in a frenzied rhythm. Charles gestured to me, and I stepped forward, laying the Project Phoenix plans across the podium for the world to see. This, Charles continued, tapping the plans, is what Riverview was supposed to be. A safe, sound structure. Built with integrity. My son, Richard Morgan, and others under his leadership, chose otherwise. The murmurs grew louder, reporters leaning forward, eyes wide, pens scribbling furiously. I will not hide behind silence, Charles declared, his voice rising. The Project Phoenix design was buried to cut costs. Critical safety protocols were ignored. And yesterday, a young man nearly died because of it. I saw Brandon Ellis standing near the back, his jaw tight, his face pale as drywall dust. But it wasn't over. Not yet. That's when the twist none of us expected walked through the door. Megan Lawson. She strode into the conference room like she belonged there, head held high, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She didn't wait for permission. She took the stage, standing between Charles and me, and faced the press with eyes that had seen too much and endured more. I have something to say, she announced, her voice clear, cutting through the buzzing whispers. Megan, I started, stepping toward her, but she held up a hand. She turned to face the cameras directly. I was the one who placed the Project Phoenix folder in Mr. Carter's belongings, she said. Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes locked on her. And I did it, she continued, her voice cracking just slightly before she steadied herself, because I couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. Not after what happened between me and Rick Morgan. At the mention of his name, a door at the side of the room swung open. Rick Morgan himself appeared, shoulders squared but his eyes dark with something that looked a lot like panic. Megan pressed on. Years ago, I was involved with Rick. I thought it meant something. But to him, it was just another transaction, like the bribes he signed off on, like the cheap materials he approved. When things got dangerous, when people started asking questions, he cut me off and left me to drown with the rest of the lies. Her voice rose, raw and trembling with conviction. I'm not standing here to play the hero, she said. I'm standing here because I want the man who used me, and used this city, to finally face the ruin he's built with his own two hands. She turned toward Rick, meeting his eyes across the room. I'm done being quiet. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. Rick's gaze darted between the cameras, his father, and Megan. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. Then, he cracked. He stepped forward, his voice barely more than a whisper, but loud enough for every mic in the room to capture. It's true, he muttered. The room froze. Rick swallowed hard, his face pale. It's all true, he said louder this time, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. The material substitutions, the bribes, the falsified inspection reports. I didn't do it alone, but I signed off on it. I thought we could fix it before anyone noticed. His eyes met his father's, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the scared boy behind the arrogant executive facade. But it's too late now. Reporters swarmed forward like a wave breaking loose, shouting questions, cameras flashing in a dizzying strobe. But all I could hear was the sound of a legacy crumbling under its own weight. Charles placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression unreadable. It had to end, Ethan, he murmured. Better it falls now than bury more lives under it. And just like that, the mighty empire of driftline construction collapsed, not with the crash of steel, but with the soft, broken confession of a man who finally ran out of lies. 6 months later, the skyline of Billings looked different. Where the Riverview commercial complex had once loomed half-finished and defiant, now stood nothing but cleared earth and foundation scars, an empty space waiting to be rebuilt, this time the right way. The investigation had done what no protest or whispered complaint could. Driftline construction dissolved under the weight of criminal indictments. Rick Morgan stood trial alongside 2 senior city officials and a handful of executives who thought their expensive suits could shield them from justice. It turned out, steel wasn't the only thing that buckled under pressure. I'd like to say there was celebration after the dust settled. There wasn't. Sure, a few people shook my hand in quiet corners, men and women who'd spent their lives wondering if anyone still cared enough to stand up when it mattered. But for every quiet "thank you," there were twice as many averted eyes, doors that no longer opened, and conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. In the industry, I wasn't just Ethan Carter anymore. I was that guy. The whistleblower. The man who tore down a company and left hundreds without jobs. They didn't see the cracked bolts, the buried inspection reports, or the near-fatal fall that woke the city up. All they saw was the wreckage, and they needed someone to blame. Grace saw it first, before I could even admit it to myself. "You didn't set the fire, Ethan," she told me one quiet night as we sat on the back porch. "You just refused to look away from the smoke." I'd spent my whole career building things. Bridges. High-rises. Schools. And now I'd become known for tearing something down. But if that's the price of doing what's right, I could live with it. And somehow, in the end, life found a way to move forward. Bridgewell Contracting offered me a job. Senior Project Manager. Oversight on a new hospital wing, the kind of project that meant something, a place that would save lives rather than endanger them. The offer came not long after Charles Morgan sold his lakeside cabin and donated a portion of the proceeds to a fund supporting displaced construction workers. He'd retired for good this time, quietly disappearing from public view. Rick Morgan. Last I heard, he took a plea deal. He'll serve time, but not as much as he deserves. That's how it usually goes. Justice isn't always clean. But sometimes, it's just enough. Now, I stand here, steel rising before me, solid and true. The new Billings Memorial Hospital East Wing. Every beam is tested, every bolt properly graded. No substitutions. No cut corners. Hank Dawson is here too, supervising the electrical systems. Megan Lawson found work again as a procurement consultant. She's the one who ensured the material orders were flawless, down to the last washer. We built this place the right way. No secrets buried beneath the foundation. No lies hidden behind the drywall. Just honest work. And as I look up at the framework reaching toward the Montana sky, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the loud, boastful kind. But the quiet, steady kind that settles deep in your bones and lets you sleep easy at night. The wind cuts sharp and clean across the site, carrying with it the scent of rain and fresh concrete. I close my eyes for a moment, breathing it in, and hear Grace's words echo softly in my mind. Your name might not be carved in stone out here, but it's in every decision you made. Every life that walks safely through these doors when it's finished. And then, like a closing chapter, the final thought settles over me. Some victories aren't about what you gain, but about what you refuse to lose. I smile, tighten my grip on the hard hat, and step forward. Time to build again.